Thank you, Roxanne. I'll hop in first and then pass it to you, Michael. My name is Jonathan. Pronouns are he and him, and I'm calling from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I I guess I'll just relatively briefly say I'm first of all, I work with Next Gen Men, and Next Gen Men is a leader on engaging boys and men in conversations like mental health, healthy relationships, and positive masculinity. And I've been with Next Gen Men for 8 years, and imagine the privilege of being like 22 years old, knowing exactly what your purpose was on the planet and having a job that lets you do it. And that's my experience with Next Gen Men. So I'll just quickly say the reason it's my passion and my purpose on the planet, at least a part of that story, is because when I was a young person, school was an incredibly unsafe place for me. And I was gender nonconforming. So I had long blonde hair. I was really small for my age. And I got called a girl, I got called a gay, and I got called worse. And that happened on a daily basis. And essentially, I had to navigate that pain, build and maintain that defiance, and um, yeah, and basically like map myself towards the person that I wanted to be in the midst of a school community that had no interest in letting that person flourish, and um, and really a staff faculty that was completely underprepared to navigate that at all. Right. So like the homophobia, that I was experiencing wasn't on their radar whatsoever in those days. So I'm passionate about boys' well-being, about working with boys to challenge gender-based violence. I'm Christian, so I'm interested in some of the theological work that's being done at St. Joseph's. And I work on almost a daily basis with schools, shifting culture and engaging effectively with boys and young men. So I'm really, really excited and interested in this conversation. And I'll pass it to you, Michael, to introduce yourself.
Awesome. Hello, folks. My name is Mike Specht, he, him, and I am a religious studies teacher and campus minister at St. Joseph's Collegiate Institute in Buffalo, New York. So we have about 650 boys, grades 9 through 12, so 14 through 18 years old. I'm a classroom teacher and I work in the campus ministry department, which means I also run kind of a lot of the extracurricular, retreats, service trips, masses that we run and also this initiative on welcoming and accepting people of different sexualities and identities. And that's why we're here today. So you'll hear more from me on that later, but I'll pass it to my colleague, Jesse Brodka.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Jonathan. My name is Jesse Smolkowski Brodka. I use he, him pronouns. And I work with Mike at St. Joe's. I'm the director of mission and ministry. My role involves a mix of student-focused programs and then adult-focused programs, working with our alumni, our faculty and staff community, and having a lot of these kind of big picture discussions about what's our identity as a school and how are we staying true to that identity. And I think these questions we're talking about today about healthy masculinity and inclusion is really central to who we are as a school. And I felt that as a student. Right? I felt where that was lacking and I felt where it was strong. I graduated from the school where I work at just about 10 years ago. So it's good to be back and it's good to be here. And I'm really it gives me hope that there's a series like this that people are engaging in and that we get to have these conversations.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, I'm going to start us off with a really broad context, which is a bit of a recognition that um, our school communities and the culture that we're able to establish in the school is not disconnected from the broader culture that young people are immersed in. We can do our best to insulate the school community, to define it in a way that's, unique to our school or unique to St. Joseph's, for example. But um, I guess it goes without saying that when a 15-year-old walks into St. Joe's, for example, he's carrying a set of messages and expectations, pressures, and norms about what it means to be a man. Um, I guess I'm curious from like the work that you do with students, what messages about manhood would you say those students have already absorbed before they even step into the school, through the school doors?
Yeah, Jonathan, I can take that one. I think because we're a private school that costs tuition to go to, and that's often a sacrifice for a lot of parents. People are sending their sons to this school for a variety of intentions. For some guys, they want to excel in a sport, whatever sport that be, or multiple sports. Some guys are really into theater or music or the arts. Some guys really want to be academically challenged and focus on that. And we're an all boys school, so there's no girls in their classrooms with them. So that offers an opportunity to kind of not focus on maybe if the girl in front of me or behind me likes me romantically, but focus on William Shakespeare or the Pythagorean theorem or anything like that. So I think the guys have a sense of I'm here to do something, and I'm very goal oriented and goal focused. And I'm hearing 15-year-olds already talk about the colleges they want to go to, the scholarships they want to get, the professional accolades they want to achieve already at 15 years old, and they're wearing the clothes that I'm wearing, shirt, tie, sport coat, at that young age. So I think a lot of ways they're getting this sense of time to lock in, whatever that looks like for me, time to focus on what I'm meant to be. And also, I think in an all boys environment, there's a level of competition among one another. I see it in the classroom as a teacher. It definitely happens on the pitch or the field or the ice rink, where there's a competition amongst one another. So yeah, and there can be a decent amount of pressure connected to all those things. Jesse, I'm not sure if you had anything in addition to add beyond that.
Yeah, I think maybe just the layer of the digital context our boys are living in. And Jonathan, I know you're a bit of an expert on this kind of subject. You could probably speak to it too. But I recently had the experience of like signing into YouTube with a new email account, and so watching the algorithm kind of figure out who I was from the spot and start sending me videos and just from I like sports. I like baseball and basketball, and just from watching those kind of videos, seeing the type of political content that was being pushed to me, seeing the type of videos with titles about pushing certain attitudes about race and gender and sexuality, and like it's pervasive in our online world, these kind of negative attitudes, and why do I say negative? Where does that judgment come from? This kind of exclusionary, right? This othering. I think the online content, the algorithms are built on othering, because if I can other someone, I'm going to click on that, right? If that video makes me feel that sense of righteousness or that sense of frustration with others in our world. And I think our guys, I had a teacher who recently went to all of our students and asked them to see on their phone how much screen time they have per day. And he had guys up to 13 hours per day they were spending on their phones. And, some more, some less. But I think the guys we're interacting with, 14 to 18-year-old boys, they're spending a lot of time online, and a lot of the things that the algorithms kind of push to young men are not very inclusive. And so we sometimes have to be the counterculture as a school in that way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I could talk about that all morning, but I really want to get into the hope in action that's happening at St. Joseph's. So you just queued up basically the next question, which is, okay, knowing all that, right? We've got a duty and a mission to live our faith and to establish a school community and culture that offers alternative paths towards healthy manhood and inclusion. So I'm curious to find out more about um, I guess sort of the theological context for what's happening at St. Michael's or sorry at St. Joseph's, in that like I think this was I can't remember if this is in the event description or in our previous conversation, but this isn't a loophole that you found, but like actually something that the faith asks of you in your work.
Yeah, I can jump on that for a few minutes, Jonathan. So we're a Catholic school within the realms of the Diocese of Buffalo, and we're founded and sponsored by the Brothers of the Christian School, the De La Salle Christian Brothers, which is a religious institute, not unlike the Jesuits or Franciscans, Dominicans, if anybody's familiar with those. So we work through the framework and the parameters and what we call the charism of that institute, that order's lens of how, frankly, to how they live out the gospel, how they live out the message of Jesus in the world today. So we have the gospels, we have the message of our church and our faith, and then we have the lens in which we look at it. So what the Christian Brothers are very good at is distilling that for us. So there's a 5-pointed star that highlights the really five important values, such as quality education, respect for all peoples. And one of those tenets on the stars is inclusive environment, building inclusive communities. So, and I think all of us on the call know that that word inclusivity is, some people don't like it. Some people want to attack that word and do X, Y, and Z with it. But it's something that we really, speak really passionately about because it stems from the very depths of our faith. If we look into the message of Jesus welcoming all peoples. So through that we have, very highly organized, systematic teachings of Catholicism in the Catechism, which kind of, I guess, distills, if you want to look at all those pages, what we understand our faith to be. So in the realm of sexuality, right, there's a few paragraphs devoted to that. And the Catechism says, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but not too much, that people who are not straight, it's a good amount, it's not a small percentage. There's a good amount of people in the world who identify as not straight. And what are we called to do? We're called to treat them with, and I quote, respect, compassion, and sensitivity. So what really our initiatives here at St. Joe's are really living out that line right there, treating people with respect, compassion, and sensitivity, people who are who identify as something other than straight or questioning or queer or anything like that. So it stems all from that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't show this one other text. Within the realm of Catholicism, I think in the past 10 years or so, there's been a lot of literature, a lot of conferences, a lot of sense of acceptance of how do we in our parishes, in our colleges, in our high schools, and all kind of Catholic spaces, how do we welcome people who are in the LGBT spectrum, and the work of a Jesuit priest called Father James Martin. He published this book about 9 years ago called Building a Bridge. It was actually in a response to the massacre at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, which the 10th anniversary is this Saturday, the 13th. So through tragedy, kind of Catholicism as a whole has kind of looked at the lens of this question in a different level. So it's very much part of who we are as a Lasallian school, as a Catholic school, to be talking about this and how we're more welcoming of all peoples.
Yeah, thank you for that. Jesse, I'm curious if you want to talk. Feel free to be like, not really, but like, I'm curious if you want to talk a little bit more about like your perspective on faith. Um, because that really stuck with me from a previous conversation,
Yeah.
with regard to this idea of respect, compassion, and sensitivity. But I'm also, this is going to be like two pronged pieces because I'm also thinking of the like, folks who don't have, do you know what? Like, maybe we'll come back to that towards the end of the conversation. I'll just say this, Jesse, do you have anything to add to that before we move to zooming into um the like where this originated within the St. Joseph's community?
Yeah, we can keep zooming, Jonathan. We can keep
Okay,
zooming.
yeah, sorry. Okay, so the zoom in that I want to do is and that's also helpful for time, so thank you for that, Jesse. I'm
Great.
easily distracted. The zoom in that I want to do is just like rewind the clock a little bit because this is where you are now, but where did this originate within the St. Joseph's community as a focus?
Yeah, so it starts back in 2022. We had a strategic planning process, and St. Joe's does a really good strategic plan because they invite a bunch of different members of the community to kind of be a part of that planning for what do the next 5 to 7 years look like at St. Joe's. And one of the members of that group was a young alumni, graduating in 2016, I believe, and he's a gay man, and he had experiences at St. Joe's that were kind of reflective of a certain level of exclusivity that he didn't feel comfortable coming out at St. Joe's. He didn't always feel like he had a place. And he wanted to change that and he had the courage to kind of speak up and say, hey, we should make this a part of our strategic plan is including the people who are members of the LGBTQ plus community. So from there, it was written into our strategic plan, which I give a lot of credit to the people who are leading that process of bringing in that voice and lifting it up. And it wasn't just included as kind of a general goal. It was included specifically under the section that talks about our Lasallian Catholic identity. So among goals, talking about building faith, they're inviting our young men to be people of service. And one of the goals is that St. Joe's is a place that promotes inclusivity specifically for members of the LGBTQ plus community. And I think that's what Mike's getting at when talking about like this is part of our identity. That type of work is it's essential to what we do. And we've had that document then to lean on as Mike and I joined this team, and we both felt strongly about that this is a good thing for us to do as a community, and specifically as a Catholic community. And so we were able to kind of draw from that support from this one alumni, from the strategic plan, and then there's other gay alumni in the community who've been really supportive and outspoken about wanting St. Joe's to be a more inclusive place, and we're drawing on their insights to make that happen.
Yeah, really cool. So I could like spend all this time in like the theology of it because I do find that fascinating. But I know where I work with a lot of educators, and I know usually educators are really interested in, okay, so like what does this actually look like in practice? So I'm curious to hear what this, for example, what this looks like on a Tuesday. Not the policy, but the actual practice. So like what does a boy at St. Joe's actually feel, and where does he feel that? Is it in the classroom? Is it in the hallway? Is it in the chapel? But yeah, so talk a little bit more into what does this look like in the day to day.
Yeah, I can answer part of that. Is my audio okay? Can you guys hear me okay?
I think it's okay.
Cool, awesome. So I can speak a little bit about that and how I've infused it in my curriculum. So this past year, I taught Religion 11, which is kind of like ethics, morality, the lived experience of, okay, like the scriptures, the sacraments, but what do you actually do with them? So we spent about about five classes, which is not like a small percentage of my time, kind of talking through the contents of this book, kind of why it was made, why people who are anything other than straight often feel pushed away from religious institutions, people who identify as Christian. Why is sexuality such a flashpoint within the realm of religion, within the realm of Roman Catholicism? And the documentary showed different ways in which parishes and schools and colleges are working to be more inclusive for the good of all people. So I think some students are like, why are we watching this? And other guys are like, this is actually kind of interesting because I know somebody who's gay, or my cousin's gay, or what have you. So, with the permission of our administration, that was something that we got, the green light to do, which is really cool. So that's kind of how it works in our curriculum as it looks like right now. And I think, Jesse, I think it's a good time for you to kind of chat more about maybe your lunches.
Yeah, so we have a group we started last year called Building Bridges, kind of named after this book Mike is talking about, where the goal of that group is to build inclusive spaces and ministry spaces for members of the LGBTQ plus community at St. Joe's and allies, welcoming to all people in that conversation. And I we started by trying some after school events that had very low attendance, and then it was actually one particular student that kind of sparked the idea to do something during the students' lunches. And we had heard from one of our students through a reflection he had wrote at one of our ministry events that he felt very alone in this community. And he also shared that he didn't have any interest in faith, Christianity, or Catholicism, and noted uh, conversion therapy as a reason why not. Right? Like, how can an organization that preaches hatred uh, also say that they have a God of love? And I was like, okay, yeah, well said. And so we reached out to that student in particular, found a couple other students who we knew would be interested in this type of conversation, and found a time in their schedule there where they could all eat lunch together. And I remember having the first one, and I invited three students, and often you invite three people to something, and two of them show up, and this one I invited three people, and five showed up. So they had just kind of brought a couple more people in, and the next one I invited the same five, and seven showed up, and the group just kind of grew organically like that. You know, when we got together, we didn't really talk about the LGBTQ plus communities specifically. People knew that this group was kind of meant to be inclusive of that particular community and group of people. But it wasn't like we were, having any specific conversations. We ate lunch together. We connected. We talked about our days. We talked about our lives. We got to know each other better. And it was out of that community, which is now a group of, up to 15 people we've had kind of joining in that space, which is a pretty significant number. And out of that group, I think has formed a real sense of community and belonging that we didn't have, or at least if we had it, it wasn't happening in as explicit of a way. I think it was happening already in different friend groups. It was happening already in different departments or with different faculty, like Mike. There's different teachers who were kind of creating those spaces for students. But now there's a really explicit space where we say, "Hey, we are inclusive of the LGBTQ plus community at St. Joe's, and if you want, come celebrate with us. We'll buy you a hot dog. We'll buy you a slice of pizza. Come join, and everyone's welcome in that space."
Yeah. I again, I work with a lot of schools, and um I'm interested in this like hurdle that you've made it past, which is getting boys in the room in the first place. And so I
Yeah.
want to highlight a couple of like tactics that it sounds like you probably did on purpose, but um essentially you're like one step ahead because it's an all boys community. But
Hmm.
something I definitely see in schools that have students of all genders is boys underrepresented in these kinds of conversations and opportunities, and girls overrepresented basically. And so there's just sort of an assumption among boys that like this conversation isn't about me, it's not for me, it's not a place where my voice is gonna be heard, or it's just it's not as important as some of the other pressures or commitments that I've made. Um, Definitely, one of my first school programs, like way back in the day, I pitched to a group of like all the grade 7 and grade 8 boys, and I happened to be wearing a pink watch. And I had 4 boys show up to this program, and at I think the second week, one of the boys was like, "Do you want to know why there's only 4 of us?" And I said, "Of course." And he said, "It's because you're wearing a pink watch." And some other kid, a socially powerful kid, said, "If you join that program, you'll turn gay." And luckily, one of the teachers heard about that, and I was not involved in this whatsoever, but she like dropped everything and had like a full classroom conversation about homophobia and the like rigid constraints
Yeah.
of masculinity. And we ended up with something like 16 or 18 boys participating, but all of which is to say, it's not just that like my voice doesn't belong here, but also um, the double layer of uh homophobia, or like that's for I'm not gay, so like that's not for me.
Hmm.
Anyways, so the tactics that you're doing to overcome some of those barriers is first of all being highly relational, saying to a
Hmm.
specific individual, "I want you to be there,"
Yep.
and I'm looking forward to and then having them to start build connections with each other. The food is an obvious one for anybody who works with teenage boys, but a space for them to like share kind of in that community, or to share in that meal together, but
Yes.
also like to say, "Hey, well, free pizza," like what that's just for me still as like an adult, if I'm like, if there's food, I'm there. And then essentially keeping it focused on like their real lives, like and having that opportunity to check in. So like the relational piece, the free food, the like grounding in their lived experience, those are all like really, it sounds like really natural tactics, but really effective tactics to getting
Hmm.
boys to participate. um I also know that like again, I work with a lot of schools, and so I don't want to be like totally optimistic and idealistic with this conversation, and that like with the right kind of theological or institutional support, some students participating, easy peasy, no problems, no friction, no challenge, no pushback whatsoever. So I think it is very natural that there's some challenges to navigate with this kind of important work. And I'm curious to hear about where those limits have been. Like where maybe have you run into pushback? How do you hold that tension? Maybe there's a tension, but maybe not. But that tension between being inclusive and being Catholic, like is there a tension there, or is there tension? And is it from students? Is it from parents? Is it from faculty? Like where have some of those tensions lived?
Sure, I can speak a little bit to that. And I can also talk about another programmatic event that we had this year with the folks from the group You Can Play, which is Canadian-based, Toronto-based. They're a group of speakers, that come into different schools and institutions throughout Canada and the United States through the lens of sports. So Matt Kenny, who was mentioned earlier on this call, was one of the keynotes that we brought to our school. We used our funds, our money, kind of some precious assembly time for the entire school, all 650 kids, all 70 faculty and staff. We all went to the gym together in April, I want to say it was about 2 months ago, and spoke very fluently. Matt and another person named Ren. How do we use inclusive language? How do we understand? There's a wide variety of people with various sexual identities and gender expressions in our world today. Maybe you don't see that right now in ninth grade, but you will, because it's a very diverse, pluralistic world. And how do we use language that's welcoming, that's not pushing people down, punching below, but how are we accepting of people of all dynamics? And I think the sports lens, because Matt was a former hockey player. We're a big hockey school. We got a lot of guys who are on hockey teams, and some of the locker room talk can seep over into the classroom and into the hallways, and sometimes that's less than inclusive talk for those of us who've been around kind of locker room culture. So how do we nip all those negative attitudes in the bud? And what was really good, the assembly was good. Talk about words not to use, talk about the importance of being your true self. And then and then our guest speakers were in like our common area to have one-on-one conversations with students who wanted to chat with them, and teachers as well, which were quite fruitful for sure. So that was great. It was fantastic. I was pinching myself because I know this does not happen at every Catholic school. I know that every Catholic school does not devote time and resources for this. We're very blessed in that sense to have administration, have the Brothers of the Christian Schools behind this. But there was a little bit of pushback, not from students, not really from students, but from a couple of parents who were like, "Why is this happening? Why are you teaching X, Y, and Z?" They heard it secondhand from the student when they came home, and who knows if the student got the whole picture either. And then the president, the principal of our school fielded a handful of phone calls or emails saying negative things about what we did. So we had a social media post lined up to put on our Instagram and our Facebook about this assembly, and unfortunately we had to cancel it because of parent complaints. And I think it's important to say, like, as a private school, that's a bit different than maybe a public school dynamic, because these are people who are paying for their son's education, so we have to keep that dynamic in mind as well. So it frankly didn't surprise me that there were a couple loud parents who kind of voiced their opposition, but at the same time, I was very proud of my principal and my president for putting the money on the line, giving us the airtime for this, and then fielding the nasty comments from the parents. So they didn't have to do any of that, but they did it because they believe it's part of our mission too. So I think there will be pushback. There was pushback 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago on this topic, just in general. Why that is, well, I think that's something for the philosophers. I think that's kind of beyond us in this conversation, people who don't want to hear those things. So, but we're continuing to do this good work, and how it looks in the future is something we're always, sifting through and trying to understand.
Yeah. I guess I do want to honor the leadership of the school in that those are some of the most precious resources a school has. Money for sure, time for sure,
Mhm.
and reputation with the parent community. Like those are
Yep.
that's no small investment in and it's again it's an assembly. It's not just an assembly, right? It's a demonstration of what matters because of the investment that happens there. So yeah, that is very powerful to hear. And I know from, again, having worked with a lot of educators, that administrative support is a game changer in terms of where they're able and willing to go. Um, yeah, with whether it's within a classroom or within a broader school community. Um, I just interrupted myself from like my follow-up thought. Oh, this is not my follow-up thought, but I did, while you were sharing, I did think of like an experience I had where um I was in a 2 or 3 day series of workshops at a school, and a parent this is working directly with students, and a parent like was really sort of grilling and interrogating me on like what exactly were we teaching. From what I could understand, her son had brought back a really garbled message. It was like some we were talking about the man box, which is the rigid set of gender stereotypes and expectations that our boys are surrounded by. And um some kid had like a metaphor that he this is grade 6, and a kid had like some sort of metaphor about like chains and breaking chains, and then the mom had somehow heard the message that like men wear chains, and she was like, I don't know if she thought it was like gang related or like where like, but the I was like the like what it was an eye-opening experience for me that like what is shared in a like in the space with the students is not always what gets communicated back home.
Mhm.
This is not what I was going to ask, but I'll ask it to buy myself a couple of moments of thinking time. But like, do you do outside of that social media post, like, do you do communication with parents about the Building Bridges group or anything like that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, go ahead, Jesse.
I was able to have one of the conversations with a parent who was not happy about this particular event, and honestly, by the end of the conversation, and luckily it was face to face. I got to
Yeah.
stand in front of this mom and talk about her son and talk about what she values and what she looks for in our education. And it's so quickly, especially when you can't have this conversation over a Facebook comment, or at least if it happens, I haven't seen it. But how quickly I could like empathize and relate to her, and she could see that I really value a lot of the same things she values, that her son becomes a respectful gentleman. And then I'm able to kind of communicate how this type of event is part of creating an environment where your son could be a respectful gentleman. And she really respected that, and I'm sure not every conversation goes that smoothly, but yeah, we try to have those conversations in person as much as possible. And we try to approach those conversations from a place of listening, right? These parents know their students better than we do often. And they're a resource for us too in our learning how to be better educators. So that's always how I try to approach a conversation like that. And usually you find some kind of common value that gets you through the conflict.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that has been a like a I guess a powerful realization for me that well just that common ground is critical. And
Mhm.
it's easy in a like this we live in a world that like spins us towards polarization like at the drop of a hat, and
Yeah.
so to like really ground ourselves on a authentic understanding that we have shared values in common, I think is really really important to
Mhm.
navigating that conversation in a productive way. Productive not really being the word that I want, but in a good way, I guess. And so, even for a parent that like I really disagree with on something related to like a political, let's just say a politicized topic, that like if we both know we actually both want the same thing for your son, which is for him to be healthy and happy, like we both want that, that gives us like that common place to, yeah, to
Mhm.
talk into, and especially to listen. So thank you for that. I did remember what I was going to say. It was simply that saying something is political, not saying something is also political. And that's something that like I really kind of resonate with.
Yep.
But to me, that diminishes in a little bit with respect to
Yep.
this idea of just finding common ground with those people who are experiencing friction with the vision, or the program. Um, so one more big thing that I kind of wanted to ask about was, to me it seems really special and unique that there's the Lasallian Christian brothers who are providing this like institutional backing, right? That it's a real gift and it's a privilege to be able to turn to the like guiding forces of the school and say this is where it stems from, and for example, you mentioned, I think it was the five-pointed star. And I guess I'm cognizant that most Catholic schools and most secular schools in general don't have that kind of institutional backing. And so I'm curious, like um, what do you do in that sense? Like, what advice would you have for other schools in terms of where does permission come from, and where does the staying power for something like this come from?
Yeah. In terms of like where does permission come from? I guess I could speak more to the Catholic school side because I've been working in education, but I went to high school myself in public school situation. Um, Actually, John, I just want to kind of make a quick change kind of to one of your claims in
Yeah,
terms
of
of
course.
um, religious orders. So Christian Brothers, Franciscans, Jesuits, Dominicans, Benedictines, Sisters of Mercy, Sisters of St. Joseph. You get the picture. So they historically in the 19th and 20th century were and are the ones who have founded and sponsored the majority of Catholic grade schools, high schools, and colleges. So in the realm of Catholic education in the United States, and I would imagine a lot of ways Canada, a religious order is often connected to, excuse me, a Catholic school is often connected to a religious order. Now, there's dozens and dozens of, they call parochial schools, like kindergarten through eighth grade in the States, that are run through the offices of the diocese, right? The organization that's led by the bishop or the archbishop. But to draw back to that point, a lot of schools have backing from their orders and their orders charism, whatever it be. And that does give us an added sense of umph, of backing up, in some ways protection, unfortunately, because if I was at a diocesan high school run by the bishop or run by the diocese and somewhere else in the United States or Canada, and the bishop didn't like what we were doing, we could have gotten the axe or gotten fired or been told not to or X, Y, and Z. That unfortunately has happened and it might happen again. So that dynamic is very real. So the fact that we're run by an order that's about this is great. In terms of the public school setting, you'd have to check obviously with your superintendent as to see how this topic, this subject can be approached in a healthy way. I will say I think there's going to be parent pushback, regardless of Catholic or public school setting, because we do live in a polarized world, that people have a lot of different opinions on this topic, and some people don't like it. And the loud ones, well, they're in our inboxes and on our voicemail. So I would say to any educator, talk to your principal, talk to your president, talk to your union rep if you have a union, talk to your superintendent to see what is a bridge too far and what's within the box that you can talk to this about. So, Jesse, I'm not sure if you had any extra thoughts on the matter.
Sure, I could just build on that to say, build, find a team, find your people, find your allies. Because in any community, there's going to be multiple people who have this type of care, this type of compassion, this sense of advocacy for those in our community who really need that explicit inclusion. And for us, it started with the alumni. We built from the one alumni in the strategic plan to we had a whole call with LGBTQ plus alumni of St. Joe's, guys from graduated 30, 40 years ago, guys who graduated within the last 10 years, all on a call kind of talking about their experience of being gay and being at St. Joe's. We also invited all of our faculty and staff to kind of self-select who wants to join us in this. And it was 20 people out of a group of about 80. And that's not just people who are supportive of it. Those were people who said, like, sign me up for the meetings. Like, I want to do this. I want to make this part of who I am. And so just having such a strong team, I could talk about board members who have been really supportive about this as well. So like as many like kind of it's a coalition, it's coalition building, right? It's find as many allies as we can in our community. And perhaps that's supported too from what Mike's talking about by the diocese, by the religious order. But there's strength in people. And if we could get a lot of people together in a room who all really care about this, we're going to be able to make steps in the right direction.
Yeah, I love that. That is hope in action.
Hope and
Like,
action.
mic drop moment. If you could like tell a story that would galvanize a team, to come together. Like, do you have any stories of what kinds of impact this approach or this work has had on the students at St. Joe's or a student at St. Joe's?
Yeah, I have two favorite stories. One of them, we're in Buffalo, New York, so y'all know in Toronto the snow we get. We had one day where I think it was -20 outside, wind chill, and the school didn't close. We stayed open. We had just had a snow day the week before, and we get in. We had one of our lunches, and I'm sitting around the table with the guys at lunches, and one of them says, it was a junior who said, "Oh, I can't believe we didn't have school today," and then a freshman says, "Well, I was glad we had school today because I wanted to be here." He's sitting in front of his hot dog and talking with his guys, And it was such a powerful moment of, okay, we're building something here. People value this type of community. And the other thing is, the center of our mission is transform lives, right? What does St. Joe's do? We transform lives. And I saw that transformation from one student I mentioned before who we got the survey from, right? Talking about conversion therapy, the student kind of talking about, I don't have anyone at St. Joe's who I can trust, who I look up to, and I have no desire to be involved in the faith aspect. He wrote down on the reflection, I am an atheist, all with periods in between each word. And that student has joined our group and come to every single lunch meeting and spoken passionately about, the things that he cares about. And at a recent meeting, started talking about recent killings in the transgender community, the death of people from hate crimes, and he came to me and asked, can we have a prayer service for these people who've lost their lives? And so we were able to do that. We were able to bring a group of people together. We were able to advertise it for the whole school to come. And this student, this young man who says, I am an atheist, right? Just 3, 4 months ago was leading this prayer service. So he was the one writing the prayers, writing the descriptions of the people who lost their lives, lighting candles for them. And like, that's the type of formation. That's the type of transformation that happens just when you give someone a group of people to be involved with. And we didn't even have to bring that to the students. The students brought that kind of care, that kind of passion to us. And so, talking about the cracks, right? And light coming out of the cracks. If transphobic violence is a real darkness in our world right now and in our country in particular. And if a young person in Buffalo, New York saying, let's have a prayer service to lift these people up, that's a light coming from within that cracks. And we're able to facilitate that light, which is a real honor.
Yeah, totally. The For me, that story makes it just like so visible how connected um these pieces to the conversation are, in that we started with this like broader culture of masculinity that boys and young men are exposed to, and obviously that culture is not disconnected from their school culture, and that school culture is not disconnected from their personal identity, which is not disconnected from an opportunity to talk about building bridges, and compassion and respect for to us LGBTQ individuals. And all of that is not disconnected from their relationship with God or with faith. Like, that's all part of the same puzzle towards, again, like you said, like building these young men towards, I can't remember the exact phrase that you used with the mom that you were describing, but like, healthy and respectful young men.
Mhm.
Um, that's all part of the same kind of like puzzle or mosaic that's being formed as these students take step towards, yeah, their best selves in a community that they want to be part of and that they have an opportunity to contribute to. So yeah, so I really appreciate that. I also resonate with the experience of, um, I talked about being tactical, right? And intentional about the different ways to get boys to engage. But what I've seen firsthand and what research also kind of demonstrates is that, like, when they're given the opportunity, boys and young men are very keen to have these kinds of conversations. They're very keen to
Mhm.
have a leadership role in shifting culture and to be positive role models for younger students, to be exploring like ethical challenges, and it's, it's the assumption that, that we often make, we being just like general culture, is that, is that boys are competitive and shallow and hierarchical and focused on, making, there's just like, there's these assumptions about what boys are actually interested in. But to me, it really doesn't matter if it's a, a senior student who's thinking about what comes next, or, or a 12-year-old thinking about, I guess, what comes next. They're excited to have the space made for them to have those kinds of conversations. Um, and really, they just need to be given the opportunity, given permission for that to be normal and accepted, and also kind of edified and admired, as well. Any thoughts on that before I shift to my next question? Okay, well, I wanted to zoom out tell you what, I'll stay on a soapbox for a little bit. And you know, I've touched on research a couple of times. And so one other piece to this that's really important for me to, I guess I was hinting at this a little bit, but I want to make really clear is um the focal point of something like building bridges in many ways is to us LGBTQ individuals or their allies. Like that's to some extent, like the easiest way of like what impact might this have on students themselves is, well, it would have a positive impact on a 2S LGBTQ plus student, for sure. And that's true. And but what I want to highlight is a piece of research from UBC, which is the University of British Columbia in Canada, that examined students' experiences with mental health and in particular suicide ideation, and compared those experiences among different demographics of students, and importantly, among students, between schools that had anti-homophobia policies within their
Mm.
bullying, sort of anti-bullying kind of framework, as well as the existence of what at the time was called a GSA or a gay straight alliance. And what they found is that um, one specific finding, I guess, was that for schools that had had a GSA or a gay straight alliance for more than 3 years, there was a drop in about half um, among for suicide ideation among 2S LGBTQ plus students. And that's kind of maybe not obvious, but it's what you would kind of expect, right? There'd be a big impact on the mental health and well-being of those students who would be predominantly at risk in the face of homophobia or transphobia within their school community. There was no other significant difference for any other student group except cisgender straight boys also had a really, really significant, almost half drop in suicide ideation. And this, so the piece there that's like really significant to highlight is that the shift, like the presence of a GSA and anti-homophobia policy is not just helping, you know, maintain a sense of safety for those students who are at risk, but also shifting the entire culture a little bit in a really important
Mhm.
way for all boys, basically, who are also navigating rigid expectations and pressures about what masculinity and manhood really look like, and experiencing, you know, the pushback or the, like I did, right, the vitriol of students who, when you don't fit in, right, when there's some part of you that doesn't match that rigid set of expectations. So I found that to just be a really important piece of research, that this is not just, as much as it is important, right, to protect the well-being and dignity and you know, show up with compassion for those 2S LGBTQ plus students, to also recognize that this is work that actually benefits an entire school community, and in particular benefits cisgender heterosexual boys.
Yeah.
So my last kind of question that I'm thinking of here is, we've been talking about, you know, this building bridges project, but what would you say in terms of like how is this impacting the broader school community at St. Joseph's?
Yeah, I think in a positive way, we challenge our boys to be good writers, good test takers, go into top schools, win the league championship for their sport. We challenge them to do all those things they maybe won't do on their own, but they'll do it with their classmates and their teammates. And I think we're also, for some, challenging more than others, challenging them to put some meat on the bone. We say, what does it mean to be inclusive of all peoples? What does it mean to be inclusive to the person next to you in math class, the person next to you in the locker room, the person next to you in the ice rink? So we work to challenge our boys to be the best versions of themselves. And this is an explicit way to do that. Like you said, Jonathan, most of our boys, our students are not gay. Most of them are straight, cisgendered. So what does allyship look like for you today? What will look like you in college? What will look like you when you're professional? So um, and like ask those questions about sexuality and identity. So that's what we're pushing to be have our students be the best versions of themselves.
And I could just add, I think compassion is good for the heart. You know, every time I judge someone, every time I other someone, you know, I lose a little bit of energy. It's draining. And every time I'm able to widen the circle of love and compassion for the people around me, that's life-giving. That's energizing. And I think you see just by having inclusive cultures, we see an improvement in mental health. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, totally. So we have 5 minutes. If anybody has questions, you know, I am sort of carving out a bit of time for for any questions from folks in the audience. So feel free to type them out, and Roxanne will keep her eyes out for that. While we wait, I'm curious if you could say to folks, like if so in the audience, let's just assume there's some educators, there's maybe some folks involved in a school community, a Catholic school community. So if you just think about, or maybe a church community, but if you could give folks one like to do item this week with regard to some of the things that we've talked about, what's like one thing that you would ask people to do this week?
Given where we are in the calendar, like I mentioned before, 2 days from now is the 10th anniversary of the nightclub murder in Orlando, where 50 people were killed at a gay nightclub. That really started this whole movement within Catholicism. I can't speak for Jesse, but I know for myself, this became a big deal for me. Like that killing, and hearing about it at mass, and hearing about the priest that I know say that we need to change something. And that's in a lot of ways has been my North Star since then, 10 years ago. So yeah, look into the nightclub shooting, look into the good work that Building Bridges does on a larger scale, that book and subsequent stories. So and yeah, ask yourselves what you can do. Every day I ask myself, what does this faith mean to me? How do I live it out in the best way possible? And this has been one of those answers, this initiative.
Yeah, beautiful, Mike. I could just say let's take it to prayer. Let's take it to our hearts. Take it to the space where we find our deepest reflection of who we are, who God is, who our collective humanity is meant to be, and then what's my little piece of it. Uh, find I want to, I strive to every day be led and drawn out of that deepest part of myself and deepest part of my faith, and from there the actions arise. So that would be my invitation. Find a quiet moment to reflect on this topic and allow whatever kind of next steps might be available to you, to let the motivation arise from that place of quiet, from that place of prayer, from that place of reflection.
Well, thank you. I have to mute myself because someone's using a brush saw right outside my window. My quick answer is tell a boy something you love about him. Just like tell him one small thing. Hey, I love this piece about you. We have time for one quick question, which is, if I'm reading it correctly, it's what's a code of do you have a code of conduct basically that gives a practical, I guess, set of guardrails for these principles? Because we've talked about basically being proactive to having a space of gathering and sort of community. But what about like in other contexts in the school, hockey culture, for example, where things cross the line? Like, has this like building bridges work translated into other parts of school policy or practice?
Yeah, I know that we do have hate speech policies in place, and that is a super important part of this work. It has to be if the community is saying one thing and then the policies say something else, the students are going to sense that disparity. And there's been even questions from our students about like, oh, I heard a student say this and nothing happened. And we were able to follow up with the people who are in charge of discipline, and they were able to have follow-up conversations. And so I think that's a really good point. And we have those conversations as a leadership team at St. Joe's ongoingly of how do the policies need to update. And I like to say too, the more specific language you can have in a policy around these types of things, the better. Great question.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I know that's a piece of like restorative practices as well, that you really do need, like like we kind of talked about, like the interconnectedness of all these different pieces means that you can't have like one thing happening in one context and not be talking about it in another. Obviously, there's different ways that our policies and manifest in different school groups and teams and locker rooms, classrooms, hallways, and all of that kind of thing. But yeah, I do want to like think that say just that was a great question. It's a good answer to think about like where does this fit into what we do as a school. That brings us to time. So if you have more questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with Roxanne. Roxanne is obviously capable of getting in touch with the three of us. And Roxanne will also be sending out an email to the link to the recording. And I think I'm gonna leave it at that, but I'll leave it open to you, Michael or Jesse. Like one of you give us a bit of a conclusion, um, yeah, to the conversation. If you're on the mailing list, by the way, you'll be invited to the next session. And I think if you've been RSVP'd, you probably have Roxanne's email. But with that, I'll pass it to you. It looks like you, Michael, to bring us to a close.
Sure. Thank you for all who tuned in to listen to this great work, this great momentum we have here at St. Joe's in Buffalo. Keep us in your prayers, those of us who pray. Keep us in your good thoughts, those of us who think good thoughts, which hopefully is everybody. This work is good and important work. And what this looks like next year, what this looks like 2 years from now and beyond that is a continual discussion in the Catholic world, and I'm sure other spheres too. We like to use the word discernment, where we pray, we listen to the voices around us, we listen to the needs of the people, and then we make our decisions, we make our adjustments. So Jesse, myself, and our team and our of supporters here at St. Joe's will continually be discerning how we can best serve our students here at St. Joe's and be good allies, have them love themselves, know that their God loves them, and that they're the best versions of themselves for a world in need. So, thank you.
Amen.